Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Parallax Abstraction, and welcome to another episode of Retro Flashback, showcasing gaming's roots for a new generation. Today we're going to be taking a look at DuckTales for the NES, which is another NES game, which was not actually my intent for my third video, but with the recent surprise, awesome announcement made at PAX that Capcom and WayForward are going to be bringing out a modern reinterpretation of this game later this year for the 360, the PS3, the Wii U, and possibly the PC, which would be awesome. I figured it was as good a time as any to take a look at one of the possibly best platformers for the NES. I dare say even one of the best NES games, period. This is really something. This is a game that had all sorts of things going against it, really. I mean, first of all, it's a licensed game. Licensed games are usually reserved for shovelware, basically. They're usually games that are made on a very short timeline with a very small budget, designed to pretty much capitalize on whatever brand they're pimping, to take advantage of suckers, for the most part. This is definitely not that. It was a licensed game, it was a licensed kids game, which basically lowers the standards even more for the most part. It was a Japanese developer's take on a very much North American property, and it's pretty bloody hard, too. But what we ended up getting was nothing less than amazing. And that was kind of a big deal back in the day. Capcom actually did a few different licensed titles, both for Disney and otherwise, and at the time, they actually did some pretty quality stuff. This game borrows a lot of traits from titles like Mega Man and some other sort of well-known Capcom titles. But it also puts some really unique spins on the platformer gameplay style that I think is really something. This game did get a sequel that was not nearly as well received and is considered by many to not be nearly as good, but it also came out in 1993 when most people had already moved on from the NES to the Super NES. So that one's kind of whatever. But this still holds a fond place in a lot of people's hearts, which obviously somebody realized since they greenlit that remake, which I can't wait for. But yeah, I'm going to show you what is unique about this game and why this should be a quintessential part of the library of anyone who wants to really experience the best that the NES has to offer. So anyway, enough rambling about this. I purposely been talking over this title screen quite a bit because the DuckTales theme is a viral thing that will embed itself in your head for days. And in true Capcom fashion, they are masters of the chiptune and did a really good interpretation of this. So, if you've been paying attention to this at all, you will now probably have this song stuck in your head for days as well. You're welcome! Alright, let's get this thing started here. As usual, I gotta talk over this, so we're gonna do it on easy. And right off the bat, you can see one of the things that makes this game really unique. It's not really an open world game per se, but it's not a linear game either, and that was really unusual back in this era, especially for platformers. There are actually multiple different levels that you can choose to go to, all of which have different themes to them, their own look, their own amazing Capcom chiptune soundtrack, and they also all have different objectives and different goals for each one. The main purpose of this game is that Scrooge McDuck is out to further his wealth. Shocking. And this game is really a score attack platformer. And what's really cool is that at various different points in these levels, you will actually have the opportunity to travel back here and retain the money or score that you've accrued so far. And you can sort of attack the game in a number of different ways in order to reach your goals. And there are certain conditions in each level that you have to meet before you can progress as well. So it's a really different formula, and really something unique that Capcom did with a licensed title. But let's start right from the beginning here. I'm not going to show you all these levels, because some of them you can't really progress very far in from the get-go. Plus, some of this should just be experienced for yourself. But let's start off at the beginning, which is the Amazon. So, here he is. This is Scrooge McDuck, and here's the interesting part. There are enemies in this game that you have to deal with at different points. but there's no real weapons per se. There's no guns, there's no anything like that. You basically can do three things as Scrooge McDuck, which is jump, obviously. When you approach certain objects, you can wind him up and use his cane to bat it almost like a golf club. When you come up and he does this, hey, look at his little tail going, he's so cute. And you can only do that when standing against an object. But this is the interesting thing, is that there are treasures hidden everywhere in this game, and as you can see, in places that you might not expect. And the way you find the treasures in the game is by either doing things like knocking chests out of the sky, for example, which you can do with this, like that, or by just jumping in certain places that makes treasures materialize out of thin air, as you saw when I originally started this, or just whacking stuff. And in some cases, it'll give you that funny little stun look there if nothing can be done. But in other cases, you'll find stuff, and in some cases very valuable stuff. And in addition to that, there is one other mechanic to this game, which is really what made it famous, which is this. He has a super awesome cane that he can use as basically an endless pogo stick, and this allows you to destroy almost any object, including stone, apparently. It allows you to take out enemies, it allows you to jump up to high points you otherwise wouldn't be able to, and this is key, because there are elements of the levels in this game where proper use of this is absolutely vital in order to be able to progress. And in addition to finding... Oh, sweet, invulnerability. Yeah, you take that. And the interesting part about this, as you're seeing, is the game sort of actively incentivizes you to avoid enemies rather than fight them, because as you might have observed there is no score benefit to taking enemies out. So, wow, I just found a secret I didn't even know was here. Wow. Exclusive, ladies and gentlemen. Mark that down if you're going to play this game. So, yeah, there is no score incentive to actually attack enemies. They're best avoided for the most part, or dealt with in a way like this that at least gets them out of your way. But your goal is to find and acquire treasure. So, here is a perfect example of where the pogo stick is required. If I step on this, it doesn't work so well, right? I pogo over it. Well, I'll kind of still screw it up, but you know what I'm saying there. You pogo over this stuff, and all of a sudden you can cross this otherwise uncrossable thing. Still requires a little bit of timing if you want to avoid taking some damage. But there it is. And this is what's really neat, is so you saw I came down a vine on the left side of this area, and I can now go up this side if I want. But much like a game kind of like Pitfall or some other titles that are not very linear in nature, you can attack the level in multiple different ways. So I could have just come from above if I wanted to and skip that whole lower section. But really, if you want to maximize your potential in here, you're best to... These, they're like the Castlevania Medusa heads, freaking hate them things. But if you really want to maximize your playthrough and get the most amount of money you can, which is your goal, then you want to try to do both areas if you can. But going down is definitely easier, so if you've already attained a lot of score, or really would rather just not put yourself through as much stress, you can choose to just go down and skip this whole little vine gauntlet if you want. And that is really cool. This was something very unique in this era of gaming. It was very hard to do. Doing open levels on systems with the very limited horsepower that things like the NES had that was not an easy thing to pull off, and you required a little bit of wizardry in order to make it work. But Capcom, if nothing else, Capcom had some wizards on their team. I think this game is a prime example of what they were capable of, because, yeah, they did a licensed kids game and actually pulled off some pretty amazing feats with it. So you'll see I died there because I suck, but you'll see that I didn't lose my money as a result of that. Now, most of the treasures, at least the environmental ones, do not respawn, so you can't game things if you are the type of person who would want to do that. You definitely do have to... You have to get back to where you were, but you're not going to get any benefit to sort of, you know, playing the same section of a level over and over again until you get to your last possible life, which makes sense, I mean, obviously. Some games did allow you to do that, but this one's a little bit more clever than that. So we're going to go back to where we were, and we're going to go up here. So you can see right away, I haven't actually done a video on Mega Man yet, but Mega Man is a game that most people are obviously very familiar with, and you can very easily see the parallels to Mega Man here. You know, multi-screen, multiple sections to the level, a lot of repeating enemies that sort of create almost a gauntlet, a certain amount of precision platforming here. But as you can, this game is definitely, while not the easiest game in the world, particularly if you want to sort of min-max your score, this is definitely not as tough as Mega Man. The movement is much tighter. Scrooge McDuck has quite a bit larger a jump on him than Mega Man does. That, like, I love Mega Man, but the one thing that drives me nuts about that series, oh god, the one thing that drives me nuts about the Mega Man series is the fact that he has such a weak sauce jump. But Scrooge McDuck, especially when you want to pogo this thing up, you can definitely get some crazy air going, which I really like. I think it's really cool. And as you can see, like when I'm doing this right here, Capcom, in a lot of their games, while they do push the NES very hard, I mean, you saw it a little bit up there just before I died, that we had some of the infamous NES slowdown, which generally comes from when a game is just trying to do too much at once and is pushing the capabilities of the CPU of the NES a little bit too hard. A lot of games did that because they believed that the trade-off of giving that really involved gameplay experience was worth the occasional little bit of slowdown. And generally, I would agree. Capcom did not shy away from that. I mean, the slowdown in the Mega Man games is legendary. But it's really good in a way because they actually designed it in those games to almost be... They almost made it part of their design in some cases. And you'll see, when I get back to the bridge here, that they kind of almost did that here too, because the game slows down, but it slows down the first time you have to cross this tumultuous bridge that falls down as you go, as you'll see. And I bombed it again. I usually have no trouble with that. But as you see, you just get that little bit of slowdown, which just gives you a little bit of time to realize what's happening and possibly to react to it. I don't know if that was intentional, but the level of attention to detail that Capcom put into their games makes me think that, yeah, that was probably fully intentional. Like, you can see something else here. You see how as I'm jumping into the... Number one, the game actually lets me jump into the scoreboard area, which, how cool is that? That never happens normally. But you'll also see that as I'm doing that, the live score elements and time elements that update frequently are blanking out. And why is that? Well, one of the limitations of the NES that you will also see in a great many NES games is that if you had too many sprites attempting to animate at once on the same plane of the screen, i.e. basically the same line of the screen, like horizontal section for lack of a better term, I'm explaining that poorly, but if you had too much going on, you would get flicker, and that was because, again, of memory and processing limitations that the NES had, which was plentiful. So what would normally happen in most games is that if it allowed me to cross into the upper UI like this, that we would see probably some slowdown and some really, really bad flickering either on Scrooge McDuck's model or on that score text itself. But what Capcom decided to do is, so as to not make game... both to improve the aesthetics and also in the interest of not making the game that much more difficult, because in certain levels, being able to jump up to this point in the screen is vital. What they did is they made the game blank that stuff out whenever you got up that high. There we go. And they did that so that you wouldn't end up with Scrooge McDuck's sprite being hard to see and flashing out, and thus making the game harder to play because it was blanking out due to the UI. that's just... I think that's just so cool. Like, so many developers just wouldn't care about that. Oh, jeez. Screw you, Boulder! Yes! But so many developers just wouldn't care about that, or they would go, oh, you know, the extra work required to make that happen is not a big deal, and who cares? You know, players will deal with it. They'll suffer through it. They'll get through that nightmare and deal with it. But Capcom didn't do that. They put in a little bit of extra effort, and they blank that out, and that makes things just that little bit easier. Aha, now you see, here's one of the objectives that are... They're not optional. If you want to properly finish the level, you do have to complete it. But you may get to this point and see that you don't have the money for it. But you also saw a little bit further back there, we had... Oh god, Disney purists are going to want to eat me alive for this, and I'm sorry, but I forget the character's name. The flying guy who was standing there when we came out to this level. I am so sorry. I know I'm horrible at this. But if you go to him, you actually have the option of going back to the level selection screen. But when you do that, you get to keep all the money that you've already earned. So it gives you the opportunity to come back to the level or to go on to other levels if you're stuck or are just kind of bored here, and allows you to approach the game in different ways. And you know what helps a lot? When you hit the right button. I meant to press yes there. And yeah, it gives you a very open path with which to attack the game. It's not an open world in the sense that you can't go anywhere at any time, but you can... Alright, now let's do this properly. And there's the platform. That's a bloody... I hope that platform's made out of solid gold, because that thing was bloody expensive. Good advice. Thanks, Huey? I don't know which one that is. Oh, jeez. Now, you see how we got just a little bit of slowdown there again. Okay, and now we've checkpointed here, so now we could return back to... I guess it's Duckburg where that screen, where the level selection is, but whatever. So we could return there if we wanted and move on to another level. Which, you know what, I think I'm going to do here. I think we've seen enough of this, and you get the idea. So, as I said, I'm not going to show you all the levels, because some of the levels you basically can't do... Geez, I'm just going to eat that. Some of the levels you actually can do very little in until you've completed objectives in other levels. Alright, let's go to Duckburg. So there we are. So you see total money, 156,000. That's the other interesting mechanic about this, because it's money and not score in the traditional sense. If you spend money, you lose it. So you'll see that I spent $300,000 in order to unlock that platform in the Amazon. Well, I don't get to keep that anymore. So I gotta earn that money all over again if I want to do that, which is pretty interesting. So, next level is Transylvania. The most memorable level, I would say, of this game, which people remember both for its environmental uniqueness as well as its absolutely incredible music, is the Moon level. I'm not going to bother showing that here. That's something I think people are best to experience on their own. Oh, alright, I'll save Huey. God. Guy needs some combat training. The Moon level is best experienced yourself, because that is just legendary. That one, it is one of the best known levels on the NES, and probably one of the best Capcom tunes ever. It's just so good. And here's Huey. Ah, yes, the illusion wall. And so sometimes you'll get little optional objectives like that, like to help somebody out, in which case they'll give you a little hint, and those hints are often very critical to both progressing or at least maximizing your score. Yoink. And you see there's a bunch of enemies in here that have you, and this is what I think is really cool, is the enemies in here, some of them can only be defeated one way, some of them can be defeated multiple ways, but it's always unique. As I said, there's no weapons per se, there's just your cane. And you can bounce off of some guys if you want, or in the case of this guy, you can wind up, take a shot at his ball and chain, and that's the end of him. And that, again, really, really cool, really different for a platformer. It's not just gun your way to the end of the level, kind of like Codename Viper, which I praised for having a slightly non-linear mission structure where your objective was to... You had to get to the end of the level, but you had to accomplish things in order to get there. The objective was more than simply just get to the end. That's very much what this is like. Eventually, your ultimate goal is to get to the end of every level, but you don't have to do it right away. You can approach the levels in different ways. You can... Treasure head! Actually, cake head. Ooh, I like cake. But yeah, you can approach the levels in different ways. You can attack them in a different order. There is an optimal way to do it, but like a Mega Man game, again, there is an optimal way to do it, but you don't have to do it that way. And it can be accomplished in a myriad of different ways. If you want to make things harder on yourself, you most certainly can do that. So you have the option of a greater challenge there if you want. The interesting little tidbit about this game as well is that if you wanted the craziest of challenges, there is apparently, I didn't even know this until recently, there is apparently a super secret hidden ending to this game, which you achieve by finishing the game with no money. Which, that would be brutally difficult, because this game, as you've seen, drops money from the sky in some cases, so it would be really, really tough to do that, I would think. As someone who's played this game a fair bit, I actually haven't finished it, but as someone who has played this game a fair bit, like, I'm trying to think how you would pull that off. And as you can see here, we have the teleporting mirror that allows you to do some interesting stuff, like this minecart, which is actually requires some real precision there. I rarely ever pull that off because, yeah, things like that. But alright, let's show you guys one more level. Show you the Himalayas. Cloud bunnies! Those look like real demonic bunnies, don't they? But, yeah, the way in which you approach this game, I think is really neat. It gives you freedom and choice. It's a very non-linear experience, and non-linear experiences were very rare back in this day because they were very hard to pull off, but Capcom knew how to do it, arguably better than anyone else. It's kind of interesting. Capcom doesn't really do licensed games anymore. On occasion, but definitely very rare. Ooh, slow down! It's very rare that they do licensed stuff anymore, but it was a big part of their business back in the 80s, and I do kind of wish they still did it, because they had development talent that was strong enough that they could even take a licensed kid game, which they could have just, you know, crapped out something with Pit of Doom. There we go. You know, Capcom could have just crapped out a game with the DuckTales name on it for a tiny amount of money, even relative to what NES games cost to make, and people would have bought it. Oh god, duck version of Jason. They could have done that, and it would have sold fine. It would have turned a profit. It would have done very well. They would have been happy. Disney would have been happy. Everybody would have been happy. You know, back in the 80s, you know, we, the game-playing public, were young kids and kind of stupid and didn't really have much of an eye for quality, to be honest with you. We played a lot of dumb crap and enjoyed it. But they really put the effort in on this game, and they went, you know what, we're going to take our experience from making Mega Man and from the big variety of platformers that we've done, and we're going to put that to use, and we're going to put out a licensed kids game that is of super high quality and will not only appeal to kids, but would have appeal for hardcore players as well as casual ones, and adults at the time as well. I knew lots of adult gamers in the 80s who absolutely loved this game. And you know what? This game is legendary because of it. You know, the remake is happening because fans were saying, man, you know what would be awesome? A new DuckTales game on a modern system. And believe me, especially since the Disney is now making their own games now, they're not even relying on external companies anymore, I can only imagine the licensing hell that Capcom must have had to go through. Yeah, clouds, dude! I can only imagine the licensing hell that Capcom would have had to go through in order to secure the ability to make a new DuckTales game. And they did it because people remember this game fondly. If it was just another piece of licensed shovelware, no one would have thought twice about it, and such a thing never would have happened. And I think that speaks volumes. And it shows what can happen, how you can make a good game out of anything if you're willing to put the effort into it. So many publishers these days, I mean, thankfully, in the era where game budgets are becoming a little untenable, shovelware is something that's kind of getting relegated to mobile phones now. You don't see nearly as much of it on consoles and PC because it's just not viable anymore. You know, people are getting smarter now, and when it comes to how to where to spend their gaming dollars, and I think that's a good thing. I think shovelware needs to die. I think it does nothing but harm to the gaming medium, and I think a lot of companies should look back and see what Capcom did with this game and their other licensed stuff, and how you can make a good game out of anything if you're willing to put in the time and effort, and it will pay dividends for you. You know, that this was a big part of Capcom's business in the NES era, and it shows that quality matters, and quality is not always a guarantee of commercial success, sadly, but you're much more likely to do well by putting out a quality product than just by crapping out garbage, and DuckTales is a historical lesson in that. I absolutely can't wait for the remake. It's going to be, I really hope it's so good, and given that WayForward has a pedigree of things like Contra 4 and the modernized version of A Boy and His Blob, I think we have the potential for something really, really cool as a result of that. But if you want to play DuckTales for the NES, unfortunately, once again, because of the way licensed games work, really your only option with this is to get yourself an NES and get the cartridge. This did get a Game Boy version as well, which is apparently still decent, but not nearly as good. It also did get, as I said early on, it did get a sequel. It did get DuckTales 2, which is not nearly as good a game as this one, if you ask me. But it was never released on the Virtual Console service or in any packages or anything like that, and that's principally because it's a licensed property. If Capcom... The general way this works is that if Capcom wants to put out another release of DuckTales, they have to come up with a separate deal with Disney, because the original deal only covered putting it out on the NES in cartridge form, and that's usually not worth it. I do think it was, you know, if Capcom had the choice of get a deal for the Virtual Console where it probably wouldn't sell very much, or an entirely new remake, I think they did the smart thing. But unfortunately, that does make it rather difficult to get your hands on this. But this was a popular game. You saved me! Oh dear. There's still some English problems, though. Though, in truth, that guy is kind of a caveman, so maybe that was not English. Ooh, health power up. So maybe that was intentional. But yeah, that is DuckTales, published and developed by Capcom in 1989, at least in North America, for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This is a fairly popular game. I don't think you'd have too hard a time finding it. If you can get your hands on it and you like platformers, you really, really should. I mean, I'm not even a big Disney guy, to be honest with you, and hence why I couldn't name all the characters. And I absolutely love this game. This is one of the greatest NES titles. It is one of the greatest platformers, and yeah, please, when the remake comes out, if it's good and they don't screw it up, please buy it. I really want to see more games like this get made. But this is a title that everyone should experience. It is historically important, and as I said, it shows what you can do when you put in effort into a game that would sell regardless. My name has been Parallax Abstraction. Thank you for watching this latest episode of Retro Flashback, and I will see you all next time.